I want to take the opportunity to actually talk to people. I mean, I know a lot of my followers go and see my posts and they see that I'm writing out. I thought it might be a good idea to make a video. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about was on tariffs. Obviously, I've been talking about tariffs for at least the last 6 months on how I don't think they make sense. But what I wanted to discuss is more on how they're being implemented and what is the goal of the tariffs. Right now, the discussion on tariffs is one that we've seen multiple different reasons for the tariffs. One that we're trying to stop fentanyl, stop illegal immigration, make trade, get trade back to parity, so there isn't a trade deficit with other countries. The idea that all other countries are ripping us off somehow. So let's discuss those one at a time. So the idea that we're going after Canada for fentanyl. The last I heard, last year it was 40 pounds worth of fentanyl that came across the border. I don't know how we're stopping that. Canada could be pissed off at us for many reasons, including the amount of guns that goes across, illegal guns that goes across the border the other way. But it's a border where most of the time it's the only thing between Canada and the US is a farmer's field. How are we policing this? Are we taking every fired government employee and going to make them ICE and line them up shoulder to shoulder along the border? Canada can't do that either. They just don't have that ability. So there's always going to be some level of porosity on that border. Just talking about the normal border. It's like saying, like, from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, stuff is crossing illegal things are crossing a bridge. Like you can't necessarily stop it that way. So the tariff for that doesn't make any sense. Again, same thing with illegal immigration. We'll just talk about the northern border for right now. How do you stop that? You don't have that ability. So the idea that is the reason, I find to be ridiculous. The next idea that we are doing a tit for tat type tariff situation, and it keeps being brought up that Canada has this massive tariff on dairy products. You also have to understand that in Canada, they have a small dairy industry that if US products were to cross into the border and were able to be sold at cheaper prices, which they would be, because the US subsidizes dairy farmers significantly. So you need to raise the price through a tariff so that they don't have to subsidize their own dairy industry, number one. And number two, so it just protects it, because again, it's very small. You're talking about potentially putting them out of business, in that entire sector of their economy. So they need to protect that for their citizens, and I understand that. We're not trying to protect things for our citizens. The idea that the U.S. is being ripped off by the rest of the world with tariffs doesn't play out. Look at the S&P 500 index. The S&P 500 index, which is made up of U.S. companies, many of them that sell overseas, import things, that the average return of that over the last 10 years is 13.8%. If I look at the rest of the world's economies, stock markets, the average return is 4.6%. So if they're ripping us off so much over the last 10 years, which includes the period of time where the current president was the president before and negotiated a lot of these trade deals that we currently have, like the USMCA. But assuming that the rest of the world is ripping us off, why is it that the U.S. companies are profiting so much more than overseas companies? If these tariffs worked so well and that we should have them, do we want to have a return on our companies that's less than half or more like a third of the return that the U.S. stock market's had? That seems ridiculous. So I don't understand that. The U.S., as far as a trade partner is concerned, and the trade deficit with most of our other trading partners, the reason for that trade deficit is that the U.S. consumes per capita more than any other country. We consume more than twice as much as many of our trading partners as per capita per individual. So if in the US we consume more than we produce, of course we are going to have a trade deficit because we're buying things from overseas, and they can't buy enough of our things because they don't buy that many things. It's not that they're not buying our things, they just don't buy that many things in general. They have less wealth in those countries. Do we want to have less wealth here? We are a service consuming economy here. So many of the jobs that are in the US are service oriented, not building items. So if you want to be able to go out to restaurants, do experiences, do things that are service oriented, you need the employees to do that. And that's what we're spending our money on, and that's what we're doing here in the US. And then we're importing physical things, not all physical things. We produce a lot here in the US as well, but we are importing those things because, again, we consume more in the US than any other large country, and pretty much anybody else in the US, if you exclude out some of the small countries where you have very, very wealthy families, like in the Middle East, where they consume a lot. And then they have a relatively small population, so that skews it. But talking about larger countries, we here in the US are massive consumers. So if the goal is that we want to get to parity with all of our trading partners, you have two choices. One, we cut consumption in the US, and that happens by having a massive recession/depression in the US where people can't afford to buy anything. So yes, we do consume less and we can become on parity with the rest of the world if that's what you want. Or number two, that the rest of the world catches up to us by trying to hurt others' economies through tariffs and through some of these other measures. That doesn't make them able to afford our goods anymore. The last argument that I've heard from many is that over the last, during the first the Trump administration, that the tariffs in China didn't have as much impact as the tariff would have, you would have thought it would have had. It didn't raise its prices as much. There's a reason for that. Because what happened then is that the US, when they raised tariffs up, China basically devalued their currency so that they can sell products into the US at the same cost, because the US currency rose up against the Chinese currency. So while their prices technically went up, the US dollar bought for the same amount, bought the same thing. If the goal right now is that we're going to tariff the world, so we are going to devalue every country, every trading partner's currency against the US dollar, that makes zero sense as well, because if that was the case, if we're trying to devalue everyone else's currency against the US dollar, yes, we can buy more of their goods, but the problem is that we can't sell anything to them because they can't afford to buy our things because their currency is worth so much less. It makes our products so much more. It doesn't need a tariff to do it. Just the devaluing of their currency now makes it so they cannot afford any of our products. So at the end of the day, what did we do? We devalued the rest of the world's currency. We hurt their economies. We are still buying things from them because our currency is worth more, so it's still cheaper to buy it from them. We are not manufacturing anything in the US that we can sell outside. We haven't raised any jobs, any manufacturing here because we can't sell things globally. This is simple economics that I would think that the president and the Treasury Secretary would understand. And I don't understand why they don't. During the first administration, we had Mnuchin in there that did understand these things. Now with Treasury Secretary Bissett, he does not. You have a president who understands real estate, and he looks at it through the idea of real estate winning and losing individual deals. He lost deals to international investors, so he gets mad, or he was mad at the time back in the 80s and 90s over that, and that's really where his tariff ideals came from. But you can't look at manufacturing in that same light because it doesn't work. You have Elon Musk, who's very, very close to the president. he looks at it as, well, I can't sell my cyber trucks and my cars, my Tesla cars, into other countries because they have large tariffs against it. Well, in China, BYD, who makes electric cars well cheaper than Tesla does, if they were allowed here in the US, which we've had tariffs against China already on that, we tariff them basically so they can't even sell them here into the US. But if this was an equal playing field and we allowed those Chinese EVs into the US, Tesla would be out of business tomorrow. Tesla can't sell into many of these, and there's losing market share into a lot of these other places because they're making them cheaper and better in other places than he is here. So the idea that, hey, he wants tariffs down and he wants to be able to sell into some of these other countries, India being one of the big ones, it's not a very good business model at this point in time. And I don't understand from that side. And I don't want to talk about that individual stock any more than that. But just from the side of tariffs, these are things that do not make sense. I do not understand how every day we can get another statement from the president, from the Treasury Secretary, from the press spokesman of the White House when she says, well, tariffs are not taxes on the end consumer. Yes, because they're 100% a tax on the end consumer. And in the short run, because of everything that's going on, the back and forth, companies cannot invest because they don't know what to do. They don't know if they should invest here in the US, if they should invest somewhere else. They don't know what the costs of any of these things are, so they're just going to sit in their hands. The longer they sit in their hands, the longer that they don't invest, that outside because of these outside influences, the higher chance that we go into recession and the higher chance that it is a irrecoverable loss. So while I understand that me having this conversation with you is not going to change what's happening, I just want everyone to understand what is happening and why it's happening and why the market is reacting the way it is. It is not just a short-term issue where it's pulling the Band-Aid off and everything's going to be better because this is how we're going to make things better. This does not make America great. This is what makes America fail. So I want just to leave everyone with that. You can agree with me, you can disagree with me, but we are seeing it in real time, and that is what makes sense. Historically, these are things that make economies fail. It is not disputable because through history, that's what's happened. Economies that have used this have not succeeded, and they are not growing at the same rate that we had previously. So with that, I'm going to leave everyone and have a good day. And I just wanted to explain my views and give you the best examples I could on some of these things.